Welcome to today's podcast brought to you by Profectus Livestock Solutions. On today's episode, we will be talking about the amino acid edge, why crude protein isn't the whole story. If you like today's video, please like and share. I'm Devin Strickerts, and today I'm going to be introducing our guest, Brandon Rodriguez.
Hi, I'm Brandon Rodriguez. I'm a ruminant nutritionist with Profectus Livestock Solutions. I've been with the company for about 2 years now. I cover the territories of Minnesota, South Dakota, and North Dakota, and I basically formulate diets and help feedlot producers and backgrounders optimize nutrition on their farms.
Go ahead and tell us a little bit about the history of PLS and kind of their nutrition approach.
So Profectus Livestock Solutions started as Prairie Livestock Supply. We kind of transformed back on June 1st of last year, so June 1st of 2024, into Profectus Livestock Solutions. The big difference between those two companies was Prairie Livestock Supply was mainly just a veterinarian supply company, and then they added on a nutrition component to it, and that's what is today Profectus Livestock Solutions. We do have a different way of looking at diets, so what we typically do is balance diets for amino acids, and we really tend to look at the amino acid to energy ratio to optimize feed efficiency as well as get better performance, such as better average daily gain, heavier carcass weights, and things like that.
How do you see this getting implemented in the real world, and can you speak on some of that?
PhD by the name of Monty Curley, who's actually with the company, is one of the owners of the company. He started doing this back when he was a professor at the University of Missouri. He was really searching for this big jump in efficiency. So in the swine side, the poultry side, they were really making leaps and bounds in efficiencies in the 90s. And the beef cattle weren't really doing a whole lot to nutrition to try to follow what they're doing. So what Dr. Curley did was try to find ways to increase the efficiency of cattle based on the improvement in genetics that we've seen. So what he kind of got led into was looking at amino acids. And he started going down that pathway of looking at amino acids. And he did see some improvements in things, but he didn't really find the whole picture until he sought out a different energy system. And what he found was that there was something out there called effective energy. So when he started looking at amino acids and as a ratio of effective energy, what effective energy basically is just a different energy system that accounts for how many calories are going to go to fat and how many calories are going to go to muscle growth. So throughout the stage of an animal's life, they're going to put on so much muscle and lean mass at a certain point and so much fat at a certain point. And if you don't account for that, you can end up overfeeding energy or underfeeding energy for those times of growth. So once he found that system, it balanced the ratio of energy to amino acids, he started to see some improvements in efficiency. Profectus Livestock was progressive enough to try to take this and make it commercialized to farmer feeders up here in the Midwest.
Or what are some of the struggles that maybe producers can face when they hear about this or things like that?
I would say some of the biggest pushbacks we get is guys just aren't fully understanding the process. They don't really understand, they don't think that we can use their feedstuffs today, or they don't think that, they're going to have to buy something extra from a commodity standpoint to bring onto their farm to do this. I think the other big pushback is a lot of guys just think that what they do today is really good, and it could be, right. They could be doing a really good job, and they're just afraid to make a change and have it go backwards, right. That's another big struggle, is if they do make a change, what if their performance is worse, and how much is that going to cost them in dollars? So those are some of the big pushbacks that I see. Devin, you're a field rep for us. What are some of the things that you tend to see in the country whenever you approach a guy about this system and talking to him about it?
They have many concerns with change. The dairy industry always seems to change a little bit faster than the beef, whether it comes from vaccine or feed. I remember before feeder wagons really came onto the scene in the cow-calf units and beef herd guys, the dairy cows herd had a feeder wagon. And then it led into the beef guys getting a feeder wagon. And then the dairy guys started tracking feed consumption, intake, milk production, and things like that. And then the beef guys started tracking feed efficiency and some more numbers like that. And so, it always seems to follow. And so I think they're applying a lot of the practices we're trying to preach as a company. Other industries are doing it today. It's just kind of that push or to get over that hump to get it done in the beef industry has kind of been a challenge. And I think the biggest thing with it is some of these guys aren't tracking a lot of things they're doing with cost of feed to put up, cost of feed to put it in the cow's mouth, and the dollars they're getting back and the gain they're getting out of their animals. I think a lot of that stuff isn't tracked nearly as tight as some of these high efficiency dairies are, because in the dairy industry they're so nitpicky on pennies and dollars, and they see the bulk tank change every day. In the beef cow industry, it's pretty hard to see that.
It takes so long, to finish out an animal, right, from start to finish. You're looking at anywhere from, 160 to 180 days for a yearling. 220 to 250 for guys that, finish out a 5 weight or in that weight range. Whereas the dairy guys, like you said, they see the milk tank every day and they can make changes and they see progression every single day. So that is kind of a big pushback is, it takes time. It takes a lot of time to get results. And one thing that we do with this company is we do have a research feed yard. Dr. Curley actually has one there in Southern Illinois where he has some grow safe systems. We do kick out a lot of that data. It is small pen data, so it's not necessarily commercial feed yard data, but we do get a lot of good data, and we're trying to constantly improve our system through that research yard as well.
When you're working some of your side-by-side trials that you've ran, are you competing against other companies? Are they running split loads? Or
Yeah, so we do a lot of these field trials, and a lot of them are side-by-side comparisons. Sometimes guys will have the ability to split cattle, so they'll have a trailer load or 3 or 4 trailer loads, and half the trailer will go on this pin, half that trailer will go on this pin, so on, so on. Other guys, you buy similar cattle, right? So if you're buying a bunch of calves out of Montana or western South Dakota, they're very similar cattle, but still different. But we'll get those kind of side-by-sides as well. Typically, we're going up against, other feed companies, independent nutritionists as well sometimes. But yeah, that's mostly what we do, and we tend to like to work on those kind of things with guys that have some sort of tracking system, a Profectus or a performance beef system or a cattler system, one of those two, so we can actually track cost of gain and average daily gain and all those things kind of consistently and monitor that very closely. So
I want to talk a little bit about some of the formulations on the diets and what feed stuff you're using on farm and what that looks like.
Yeah, so, for our formulation, as I kind of touched on it earlier, we look at a couple of different things. So one of them being that effective energy. We don't formulate diets based on net energy for gain or net energy for maintenance, really. We look at effective energy. And then, once we work on effective energy, our goal is to basically get that energy. We use a ratio for energy instead of like an actual mega cow number, technically. What we try to do is to get that energy ratio is based on how much are they going to gain and how much energy do they need to get there. So say a 1.0 ratio would mean that everything that they are eating is going to get them to that weight. So if we're balancing a diet for an animal to say do 4 pounds a day, and they're going to eat 18 pounds of dry matter, and that EE or effective energy ratio is 1, then they're going to get everything they need out of that feed, and they're not going to waste anything. If that effective energy is say 1.05, then what that basically means is they're eating 5% more than what they really need to gain that 4 pounds a day. So that's one of the first things we look at. And then with that being balanced, then we start diving into amino acids. Amino acids are basically the building blocks of protein. And without the amino acids there, if you have the energy to gain that weight and you don't have the amino acids to do it, you're not going to get the results, right? Or what those animals are going to do is overeat on energy to try to meet a minimum amino acid requirement. So the way we see it is cattle really don't have a crude protein requirement, right? Everything, every mammal really has an amino acid requirement. And they're going to eat as much feed as they need to meet that amino acid requirement. So if you have enough energy in a diet to have an animal do a 3.5 or 4 pounds a day, but you don't have the amino acids to do it, and you have enough energy in there for them to do it on 18 pounds of dry matter, but the amino acids aren't there, then what they're going to do is maybe eat 20 pounds of dry matter or 21 pounds of dry matter to get those amino acid levels that they need to gain that weight. And that's when we start to see some of these overeating issues, maybe some rumen upset, some rumen problems, some bloat, some acidosis issues from just them overeating energy to try to gain the weight that they think they can based on the energy level of that diet.
When you're formulating these diets, is there any technology or things you're using to help you guys look at some of these metrics and understand if they're overfeeding energy or if they're underfeeding protein or where their cost to gain is at or where it could be?
Yeah. So, a lot of times what we'll do for guys to show them if they are interested in anything is we'll take what they're doing today from a diet standpoint. We'll plug it into our formulation program, and we'll kind of see where they fall in that EE ratio and amino acids, right? So we can tell a guy if they're deficient in lysine or arginine, or if their effective energy ratio is over that 1. And then what we'll typically do is formulate a diet that fits our program, right? That has that EE ratio closer to a 1, meets all the amino acid requirements. And then we have a pretty good Excel spreadsheet that we've built in-house here that kind of shows those diets compared to each other. Kind of shows some performance differences on what we'd expect to see, some differences in feed efficiency, maybe average daily gain and cost to gain. It kind of gives you a really good breakdown of the difference in profitability, right? You mentioned earlier sometimes one of the biggest pushbacks is cost to do this program. So that really kind of dives into the cost and the return on investment with this program over what you're currently doing today.
Is there any drastic differences to what diets would look like standardly versus our approach to some degree?
We can utilize any kind of feed stuff that guys have on farm today. We use things like, typical diet for us is going to look like silage, earlage, high moisture corn, dry corn, some form of distillers or gluten. We work with a lot of guys at background, so we work with all sorts of different types of hay, oat hay, barley hay, alfalfa, haylages. I do a handful of diets up here in Minnesota with guys that put up some wet hay and haylage kind of stuff. So we can utilize pretty much anything you have on farm. And the way we kind of approach that formulation thing is, the way I tell guys I do it is I can typically get 90% of where I need to be with everything you have on farm. And then we bring in some sort of supplement. That could be a dry supplement or a liquid supplement. It comes in meal form or pelleted if you need it pelleted. And, we bring that in to basically just get us 10% of the rest of the way there, right? Some of the things that we can do for guys that's a little bit different than industry standard. We tend not to have as many diet steps for guys that want to finish cattle. So, say you bring in a 5 weight, a lot of guys are typically looking at doing maybe like a 40 or a 42 megacal starter. Then they bump them up to say a 45 or a 46, and then a 50, then a 52, then a 56, then a 60, then a 62. Normally what we tend to do is kind of break our diets down based on weight. So say that 5 weight comes in, we may throw them on a starter ration similar to what they're doing today for like the first 21-ish days, maybe 14 to 21 days. And then from there, we'll have one diet that will take them from, say, that 550, 600-pound range up to 800 pounds. We may have one more diet that goes 800 to 1,000, and then we'll have a finishing diet that goes 1,000 to all the way out the rest of the way. And so instead of having, 6 or 7 steps, you may have 3. Some guys find that to be very convenient. Some guys kind of think of that as being really weird. So there's some of the, that's some of the other pushbacks that we get is, it is a little bit different from that standpoint. But as far as the way the diet looks and kind of the feedstuffs that we can use and how it's formulated, there's no really, really massive changes to what we do, I would say. Though a lot of it's small tweaks here and there. Maybe you're feeding a little more distillers in our diet, maybe a little less distillers in our diet. Maybe we can push corn silage a little harder than what you're used to. One thing that we do typically, do for some guys that ask is we can take hay completely out of the diet, especially on finishing cattle. So I would say from like that 600 to 700 pounds on, we do a ton of diets without really any, like hay type or corn stalk type roughage. We will still use silage or earlage as like a roughage source, but there's no long stem hay, no corn stalks, none of that stuff in those diets. And that's something that we've done and had a lot of success with. The guys tend to like sometimes, if they don't have access to a big hay field or they don't put up a ton of hay and they're buying a lot of that hay and they don't want to have to buy hay anymore. That's something we can do for some of these guys. So
you're telling me you can pull mostly all the roughage out of a backgrounding and finishing diet and not run into acidosis and bloat problems. I haven't really heard much of that before in the industry. Tell me a little bit how you can get away with that and how the animal is responding and what that looks like.
Yep. So something we really look at, when we formulate these diets, is the amino acid side and the effective energy ratio. But also we really pay attention to like rumen ammonia and rumen degradable peptides, which basically is just peptides are just the chains that make up proteins. So when we balance it for basically a starch to amino acid, a starch to a rumen nitrogen and rumen peptide ratio as well. And what that does is just promote a pretty healthy, diverse group of microbes in the rumen. That allows us to kind of stay away from having to have that so-called scratch factor in the rumen, but we still have some promotion of these fibrolytic bacteria that can stay around. And what that does is just help to kind of naturally buffer the rumen, so we avoid some of these acidosis and bloat things, even though there's no hay in the diet, right? So basically through formulation, both balancing for amino acids and effective energy. We're not overfeeding energy, and those cattle aren't overeating on energy, so we run into less rumen problems with that alone. But then we also are balancing for the right amount of rumen ammonia or nitrogen in the diet, as well as rumen degradable peptides.
What's some of the advantages in your brain that you've really felt that this is the way you should be doing diets?
Looking at diets the way I used to do them in the past, looking at NEG and crude protein mainly as the two building blocks of the diet, right? Guys will also look at ADF and NDF too. Some guys are diving into some metabolizable protein as well today, or starch content too, and ruminant diets is starting to become a little more popular. But doing diets that way, I would say some frustrating things that you would typically see is you would be at a guy's place and you would run a diet with a group of cattle, and maybe they do a set of yearlings is doing a 4.2 or a 4.5, right? And they're pushing a 6 0.5 feed efficiency or feed to gain, and they did great. They bring in another group of cattle, very similar cattle. When you look at them, the look is there. They look like they should do really well. They look just like the group that just left. Genetics are probably not the exact same, but they're probably fairly similar, right? You just fed a bunch of Sim Angus cattle, and now you bring in a bunch more Sim Angus cattle. They should perform similar, and they don't, right? And I think the inconsistency of those rations is something that I always saw in my past career doing diets that way. And then with these diets, we see a little more of that consistency, right? We see a little more consistent intakes on cattle. We see more consistent average daily gains on the same types of cattle, even if they're not straight up genetic siblings. We still see very, very close consistency. I think the other thing too that I used to see was a lot of what you would call maybe variation in a group, right? So you would have your really high top end performing cattle. You would have a little bit in the middle, then you would have a little bit at the end. I think with doing diets this way, we tend to uniform those cattle a lot more. So instead of having to take the tops off of loads 3 or 4 times, guys can take whole pins maybe at a time, or maybe instead of taking a third of this pin and a third of this pin and a third of this pin to make a truckload, they can take a half of a pin, instead, and it just kind of shortens those days on feed for the whole group to get done. So that's the other thing I've really noticed with them. When we look at like backgrounding type cattle, I see a lot of cool things that we can do there as far as average daily gain goes. A lot of guys like to really, really slow grow these guys. Maybe a 2.5 average daily gain. You talk to a lot of guys that background cattle, 2.75 is kind of scary for them, right? They don't want to push that hard because
they don't want to make them fleshy.
Yep, they don't want to make them fleshy. No one in a sale barn wants to buy a fat feeder calf, right? So, so one thing that we have done, for the last couple of years with guys that we work with on backgrounders is push those cattle pretty hard, right? Pushing them to those 3 pound average daily gains. Even another nutritionist that works for us, he's got a guy that in Iowa that's backgrounding some calves, and they're doing close to a 4, I think, right now. And they don't get fleshy, right? And that just goes back to that effective energy and the composition of gain, that we're giving that animal the right amount of energy and the right amount of amino acids for them to not just put on fat, but also put on all the lean mass that they can as well. So, those cattle just look really, really muscular. They build their frame, they build their muscle, but they don't put on a lot of fat. And then when they do hit a feed yard, they're kind of ready to rock and roll and just cruise for the next guy. So
if I'm a producer listening to this podcast here, and you said a lot of things, and I'm interested in Profectus Livestock Solutions and what they have to offer on the feed side. Where do I get started, and how do I go about it?
Yeah, see, I think Devin, you could shine a lot of light on that, right? So, we work with a lot of producers from across the country, and Devin's in this truck a lot, driving around to see all those guys. And I don't know, what's your experience when you have a guy who's interested? Kind of walk us through what that process would look like.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the on-farm stuff is going to be handled by the field reps. Profectus has many field reps across the Midwest and many states, and so what those guys are able to do and offer is on-farm services such as pulling feed samples, looking at your cattle, understanding what your operation looks like, really digging in and not just getting a brief overview, but actually knowing what is going on there. And then once we get a good feel for your operation, your place, now we're just there to help. And so that's where we really start digging in. Profectus has so many things they offer between nutritionists and vet services. We come to the farm on the nutrition side and the amino acid side of things. We're going to pull the feed samples is where we're going to start. It's probably going to take us about a week to get those back. Brandon, you, Carson, and a few of our other nutritionists on hand. They're willing to get on the phone right away and start piecing together some of these diets for you, formulating them and getting them together. And then we're going to go back and forth a lot. It's a very consultative approach. There's really no one-size-shoe-fits-all type with amino acids. You really have to dig in and know the facts because of how many variables there are with what our nutritionists are looking at. And so we're going to do a lot of back and forth with the customer, going to figure out what fits them logistically, how we can get the feed there, where they can store it, how all that works, and then what that process looks like. So that's a little bit of what the field rep does. The nutritionists are the smart guys. The field reps are also the smart guys, but we're willing to help the nutritionists out and get them their information that they need and getting them started.
Yeah, and I would say also to add on to that, one thing we really also ask a lot of questions, like Devin said, and we try to figure out kind of what are your goals from an operation standpoint, right? So if you're a backgrounder, right, are these calves going to get, and it's November, are you looking to sell a good chunk of these calves in February? Are you looking to maybe take a good chunk of them to grass in June? So even though we can do a 3.0 or a 3.5 or a 4.0 average daily gain, it's not always the best thing if you want to take them to grass, right? And they're already 600 pounds. Right. So we do have those conversations of kind of logistically, like, what do you want to do? When do you want to sell? What's your goals as an operation? What kind of feedstuffs do you have? What do you want to? Do you have a silage pile from a year ago that you got to use up, right? And you just want to get done with it so you can open up the next one. So do we need to push a lot of silage, or are you running low on silage and we need to pull back on that silage and find something else for you to feed? I think the other big thing that we look at too is just trying to help you make good operation decisions. If there's another commodity that we think you can bring in to help you out and it's going to lower some of your costs, we'll make that recommendation, right? I get these phone calls a lot from guys asking me, hey, I got a deal on this. What do you think? Is it worth me buying or spending time trying to get it taken care of or utilizing it? We do a lot of those things. So it's not, to Devin's point, these aren't really cookie cutter diets. And we're also not one of the companies that's just going to give you a diet and some bat sheets or load your diet up onto your performance beef or cattle program and then just wait for you to call us with a problem. We try to get out there. We try to talk to you, and stay ahead of any issues if we are going to have them, and just try to, like Devin said, be very consultative, be very service driven and service oriented.
I think the next step is we talked about how we get a guy started, and then once we get a guy going, the field reps are there. They're walking the cattle. They're looking at them. They're constantly making ration changes and pulling new feed samples for you guys. Just kind of walking hand in hand. If we have to do any weighing of cattle of some sort, if we're running any sort of on-farm trial, we're going to assist in the weighing of those cattle because we want to know what the cattle are doing. We want to track this. We are very curious in the data because we're so confident in the feed rations and what we're doing and our ability to grow them and feed cattle the right way, the way we think the cattle should be fed with amino acids and effective energy. And so, just constantly staying there and being with our guys and watching these cattle grow and improve over time and watching the changes happen like we talk about that some of these diets can do for them. So that's a little bit of some of the stuff that the maintenance work that the field reps would probably do, I would say.
What do you typically see on a farm that kind of switches over to what we're doing, and your customer base, kind of what have you heard from it?
Vast majority of my work is with the backgrounders and the cow-calf guys. And these guys, what they've seen is drastic improvements in the quality of calf. The variability is gone. The consistency of the animal is there. Like you tuned in a little bit about the finishing weights and some of the variability there, we're seeing it in the backgrounders. The earlier we get those calves started on an amino acid diet, the better effect we have, because as the younger the animal, the more important amino acids are for growing. And so we're really just having a massive effect from those 4-weight, light, flyweight calves that might have some issues, and we would call them moderate risk to high risk calves. We're just really seeing clean them up. I mean, they're just performing more like better calves or middle of the road calves instead of these bottom enders, with consistency, average daily gain, growth, intakes, battling through weather transitions, battling through ration transitions, starting cattle on feed. The cattle really, they just look bigger, they look framier, they look growthier, stretchier. And we get those bigger gains, but we don't put on the fat. All the gain we're getting is lean gain, good gain, the right gain, I would call it. They just get big shouldered, flat backed. These are a set of calves that you want to sell in the sale barn, and they sell at the top of the sale barn week after week. And my guys have been consistent, load after load, yard after yard, and it really has to do with these diets and some of the work that we've done with them. So.
Yeah, so I think the other thing that kind of speaks to consistency, I remember one time I was driving around with you up in North Dakota. We were in an area where we had quite a few different yards on feed, and we were going to yard after yard after yard, and like we both said, hey man, like you could act like we're basically on one yard right now, right? Mm-hmm. All these cattle kind of look the same. I think it was like in the middle of like February or March, I can't remember, but it was just yard after yard after yard. It just looked like all of those cattle were like siblings, basically. They were very close, and you could just tell that they all had the same kind of structure, the same kind of look to them. And it was wild because they were all using kind of different feedstuffs. They were all different types of cattle, different management styles, different pen types, so many different variables. But the consistency from yard to yard and that eye appeal and that look that they had was still there, right? And I think that was kind of neat that we pointed out. We had the videos of one yard, and then you kind of showed the next one, and you could barely tell what yard you were on just because the cattle kind of looked pretty much the same across the board. So that's that kind of consistency to me is a big deal. So.
Yeah, it's just the consistency of the cattle has been there, the performance has been there, the health has been there. I've been happy to be a livestock consultant for PLS and be able to go to these yards after yards just because of the customer satisfaction and the cattle performance. So thank you, Brandon, for joining us on today's podcast. Thank you, everyone out there. Please like and share this video. All right, thanks.